Lecture 5, Why Music? A Western Viewpoint. As we ask ourselves the question, why music? We turn our gaze to music in the West. Music is a part of human activity, and teaching and learning music is something people in Europe and its diasporas do. In the Western tradition, we can trace writings about music to the classical era Greece. In Plato's Academy, named for Academius, who owned the olive grove where the academy was located, founded outside of Athens in the 4th century BC, music was a core subject along with biology, geography, astronomy, mathematics, and history. Plato was opinionated about music, writing of the ways in which music ought to be performed and what music ought to be learned. In the ideal republic, people would sing music in union with gymnastics to form harmonious minds and bodies. This connection of music making with movement hints towards a type of performance that cultivates the mind, the soul, and the body. But Plato's notions of worthy music can seem odd and at times off-putting to us today. Plato recommended the music performance be balanced, neither excessively slow nor fast, soft nor loud, etc. Because the music made ought to form the ideal republican citizen, described as one who is self-controlled and lives in harmony with nature and other individuals in a city. In his lifetime, Athens had approximately 250,000 people, though only 30,000 citizens eligible to vote and serve an elected office. Plato wrote, quote, "The high-spirited element of our nature, if rightly trained, becomes brave, but if overstrained, would naturally become hard and harsh. Gentleness, if relaxed too far, would be softer than is desirable, but if rightly trained, would become gentle and orderly." Some examples of the golden mean, the perfect mid, include in between rashness and cowardice, courage, in between irascibility and lack of spirit, patience, in between arrogance and understatement, truthfulness, in between tomfoolery and boorishness, wittiness, in between shyness and brashness, modesty. Universities are still called academies today. Plato's idea of the ideal music being connected to something like a golden mean persisted throughout the history of Greece, the Roman Republic and Empire, and into the European Middle Ages, when the first universities still in existence were founded. The universities of Bologna, founded in 1088, Oxford, 1096, and Paris, 1160. These universities taught music as one of only 7 subjects called the liberal arts, with liberal referring not to 21st century U.S. politics, but to its etymological roots of generous and noble, and also the word book, liber. Our word library shares a root with the word liberal. If you were to ask one of these musicians, why music? They would likely answer, because it cultivates a harmonious, generous, and noble person. But most modern musicians don't hold to this idea of the best music being the most moderate. Rather, musicians today seem to perform music that explores a wide range of emotions and ideas to be found on either end of Plato's spectrum. What might Plato think of today's egotistical, silly, coarse, brazen, introverted, or disheartened, but rarely mid, musics performed in American concert venues and schools? For much of the late Roman, Middle Ages, Renaissance, the Age of Discovery, and modern eras, music was performed to understand God. The Emperor Charlemagne, 727 to 814, recommended the careful notation and singing of psalms. And Martin Luther, 1483 to 1546, wrote, quote, Music is a delightful, noble gift of God. Next to theology, I esteem and honor music. And we see how David and all the saints clothed their pious thoughts in verses, rhythms, and songs, because in times of peace, music rules. End quote. For Charlemagne and Luther, clearly the question of why music is answered with its focus, religious adoration. However, by the early modern era, the Age of Enlightenment, some secular authors, such as John Locke, 1632 to 1704, warned against gentlemen spending time learning music. Locke wrote in a letter to his friend Edward Clarke regarding the education of his son, quote, "Music is thought to have some affinity with dancing, and a good hand upon some instruments is by many people mightily valued. But among all those things that ever came into the list of accomplishments, I think I might give it the last place. Our short lives will not serve us for the attainment of all things, nor can our minds be always intent on something to be learned. It wastes so much of one's time to gain but a moderate skill in it, and engages in such odd company, that I think it is much better spared." End quote. The question of why music for moderns who followed Locke's way of thinking, might simply be answered in the negative. It's not worth it. This idea that performing and listening to music is a waste of time, and that musicians are social outcasts, persists today, alongside many writers who hold more traditional view of music as having value. This is the nature of ideas about music. It may very well be that all ideas held in the Western tradition, as well as those held by non-Western cultures in our more global 21st century, are alive and well. Ideas that are favorable and those that are detrimental are held today. Understanding where ideas appeared may be illuminating for us looking back. Even among music's devotees in the modern era, there was a change, and not all musics were respected. Classical music arises as superior with its adoration of the composer as a genius, and music participation was transformed. Europe and eventually America saw a decrease in music making, singing and playing instruments. A demarcation between music performers and listeners arose. Appreciation became the primary focus of music for modern people, especially among aristocrats and wealthy merchants who now hired professionals who they listened to, performing music which the listener may never attempt to perform themselves. Johann Sebastian Bach, 1685 to 1750, worked for Prince Leopold of Anhalt-Köthen in modern Germany. George Friedrich Handel, 1685 to 1759, served George I, who was Prince of Hanover, Germany, and later King of Great Britain. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, 1756 to 1791, was employed by Hieronymus Colloredo, the Prince Archbishop of Salzburg, Austria. Among Europe's nobility, aristocracy, and wealthy capitalists, music listening became the emphasis of music. The English polymath John Ruskin, 1819 to 1900, wrote widely about music. He suggested the, quote, corruption of music in modern days is to be found in the idle and sensual seeking for pleasure in the sound only, without any true purpose or sentiment at all, and often without the slightest effort to discern the composer's intention or understand the relation in a master's work between the syllable and note, end quote. From this perspective, enjoying music without understanding it is problematic. Rather, the music listener has a job to do, to intelligently receive from the composer, through the musician, a message. This required a new type of music schooling. When music education appeared in the United States, with the early singing schools beginning with John Tufts, 1689 to 1750, and then the Boston Public Schools with Lowell Mason, 1792 to 1872. This European dual and separate emphasis on singing and listening journeyed from Europe. Participation in church service was the goal of Tufts singing schools, and appreciating music was of central import for Mason. This estrangement of music classes focused on performing, such as band, orchestra, chorus, and guitar class, and classes attentive to appreciating music, has been, in some ways, ossified in public schools, as well as concert venues and the recording industry. Though today, many people work to fuse, transform, and advance visions for the why music question that are responsive to today's musicians, communities, and the world.